There are multiple ways to keep in touch with the Wolf Connection podcast. Through our Instagram handle, the Wolf Connection Pod, and for comments and questions, send us an email to podcast@wolfconnection.org with your comments, questions, and guest ideas for Stephen and myself. You may hear your question answered on an upcoming podcast. Thank you for your support, and howls to you all. Welcome to the Wolf Connection podcast. I'm your host, John Kalfa. Let's talk about some moles. All right, awesome to have this individual back with us. I think it's been over a year and a half since he's actually been on the podcast, but he won a very special award at the International Wolf Symposium, Voices for Wolves. That was awarded by the International Wolf Center at the International Wolf Symposium back in October. He is also the chair of the Advisory Council for the Timberwolf Alliance since 2017. He was the State Wolf Recovery and Management Program in Wisconsin from 1990 to 2013. He is Adrian Wydeven. Adrian, it's great to have you back, man. How's everything going with you?
Great. Thanks for having me, John and Stephen.
No, it's good to have you here. And again, like I said, just congratulations on that award. I want to get your thoughts really quick because we do have a lot to dive into we're going to be talking about the Wolf Management Plan for Wisconsin coming up in 2023. But I want your overall thoughts of what you thought about the symposium, obviously getting the award that you got, and just what was the experience like for you to be in that situation with all of colleagues and individuals that you've studied and looked up to and speak to on a regular basis?
Well, it was very gratifying and very enjoyable. I really enjoyed the opportunity to continue to learn more about wolves, but also run into a lot of old friends that I've made over the years. And so being able to have those kind of contacts, for me, it's really nice because it's relatively close to my place in northern Wisconsin. It's less than 200-mile drive. So it was nice to be able to attend that and see the updates that are occurring on wolf research across the world. So having all that information across the period of just 4 days, it's really terrific.
Yeah, it was a lot. I think Stephen and I were talking to a couple of individuals that were there already and more to come as we keep going down the podcast. But yeah, I felt it was a lot of information, a lot of good people that were there. And I just wish for certain ones there was a little bit more time, but that's why we have the podcast platform and we're able to do this for a little bit longer period of time. So
yeah, one of the things I guess that is a bit of a problem is that you normally have 4 or 5 concurrent sessions, and sometimes it's really hard to choose which one you want to attend because every time you're seeing a good talk, you're also missing 4 good talks.
Yeah, that's always how it goes. So let's get into this. And again, if we sort of missed up here, Adrian, obviously you correct us. But this is coming off the heels. So for anyone that remembers, I believe the very first podcast we had with you was back I believe it was right after the February wolf hunt of 2021 in Wisconsin. The quota was met, I believe, within 2 or 3 days.
That's correct. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and so now the state has, I believe, gone back over. They went back to the drawing board, and they've come up with this wolf management plan. And so, really, what we want to dive into for everybody out there to hear. And by the way, thanks to Rachel Tilseth for reaching out to me and to us to let us know that it came out, that you're available, and that we can talk about this. So, just give everybody the basics of what goes into a process of putting together this plan, because I know it's a lot of pages, it's a lot of stuff for people to read, but in layman's terms, what's the ultimate goal and the mission of this specific plan from the Department of Natural Resources in Wisconsin?
Yeah, so backing up a little bit, that this plan actually replaces a plan that was last done in 1999. So we're quite a ways away from the last time that the Department of Natural Resources did a plan. That 99 plan did have a minor update to it in 2007, but these plans are typically done to provide background and directions for managing a wildlife species population over the next 10, 15 years. And in the case of wolves, it's the plan kind of sets out how we're going to manage wolves, where we're going to encourage wolf populations, if there are areas where we're going to try to reduce conflicts, how we're going to do that. In the case of the wolf plan for Wisconsin, it does have hunting in it and a requirement in a sense, because there's a state law that requires the Department of Natural Resources to hold a wolf hunting and trapping season anytime they're not on the federal or state endangered or threatened species list. So the hunting season is part of the wolf plan, but this is kind of the long-term plans for how we maintain a healthy wolf population, the kind of things we have to do to maintain that population, the surveys that need to be done, the public outreach that are necessary. And it's the way it's done normally is the agency gathers an advisory council and goes through a series of meetings to discuss the various aspects of the plan and work out within the advisory council, getting their advice. And at the end, then the agency sits down and takes in all the information they've gathered, as well as reviewing other scientific documents and reviewing the history and of wolf management issues in the state, and then use all that for the background of creating a new plan to determine the future direction of wolf management for the state.
So go ahead, Steve. Were you going to ask something? Okay. So when you're now, because wolves, remind me if I'm wrong, wolves in Wisconsin are now they're under the act right now, aren't they? They're protected under the Endangered Species Act now, or they're not? I can't remember.
They are. And
Okay.
it has been confusing because there's been a back and forth. That when I was the head of the wolf program in 1999, when we developed the state plan at that time, part of our efforts at the plan were determine how we're going to manage wolves when they're federally delisted. We anticipated at the time that was going to occur about 2000, and that didn't occur until 2007. But since that time, it's reversed every time that delisting has occurred. So it occurred in 2007, 2009, 2012, 2021. But each of those are challenged in the courts and cause wolves to go back on the endangered species list. So currently the state of Wisconsin lists the wolf as a game species, but with a closed season. But the federal government currently lists them as an endangered species.
So how does that work then for the plan that you're trying? Because if they're a protected species federally, you're a game species inside the state. Because I'm sure some people will hear that and say, well, they're protected. So they're protected, but with clauses. Is that how this works when you're making a management plan? How does that work?
Well, the plan lays out what can be done when wolves are federally delisted and what can be done when they're not federally delisted. So things such as having a public hunting season, allowing federal trappers to remove government trappers to remove problem wolves, allowing landowners to shoot wolves in the act of attacking pets and livestock on their property, or allowing landowners to get permits if they've had chronic problems with wolf depredation in their land. Those kind of things are not possible. Those are listed in the plan as things that can be done. Excuse me. When they're not on the federal endangered species list. So the plan has to point out what can be done when they're federally delisted, as well as what can be currently done.
Got it. Okay. So let's start with the stuff that you took away, and this is publicly available, correct? So anybody in any state can read this.
Right.
In other words, okay, great. And we're going to get to that. So those of you, everybody that's listening, we'll have the link in the description when this episode goes out, so you guys can look at it. There's a public comment period, so we'll make sure you guys are aware of how to make your voices heard and to look over everything. But it's 178 pages. We really want to give you guys, those of you that are listening, the major points that are happening right now. So let's tell everyone out there, Adrian, the positives that you all took away from the general gist of what the management plan is putting forth. So it seemed like there was a lot of positive movement forward. So just go ahead and give everybody a little bit of a breakdown of what you guys were seeing that was in the positive direction there.
Sure. One of the things that we did with the 99 plan, we created this goal of achieving a population of 350 wolves. And that made sense at a time when we had only 200 or less wolves in Wisconsin. But at the point we are now, where we're approaching a population of about 1,000 wolves in Wisconsin, those kind of numerical goals are no longer useful anymore. And the current plan gets away from numeric goals and uses metrics of the health of the population, sustainability, ecological benefits as more the criteria for managing the wolf population, especially in core areas where the emphasis is maintaining sustainable population that are providing ecological benefits. In areas where where habitat's more marginal, there is more emphasis on some of the controls, and in areas where it's poor habitat, there's also more emphasis on controls, but at the same time recognizing there's still some ecological benefits for the wolf population. So getting away from numeric goals, I think, is really important, and focusing on other metrics that are more useful for wolf conservation management. Also, the current plan creates buffer areas around Indian reservations. In Wisconsin, Indian reservations are the tribal lands. The tribes have authority on managing wildlife on their lands, and the state recognizes that there's not going to be hunting seasons on their lands, and those packs are supposedly protected. But the reservations in Wisconsin are relatively small. There's probably not a wolf pack that's on a reservation that doesn't extend beyond reservation boundaries. So those packs are still exposed to hunting and trapping seasons when those are authorized. And the new plan creates buffer areas around the reservations to more carefully protect those packs. So there's less of a risk of those packs being impacted by hunting and trapping seasons. The plan includes, it updates the zoning process in the state. So really focusing on maintaining healthy wolf populations in core areas of wildlands across the state where most of the public lands are, and allowing greater control of wolves in areas where you got more fragmented habitat and where there's higher levels of conflicts. So there's more of a focus on those kind of controls in those areas. So those are some of the things that we see as real positives in this new plan, is just more focus on the ecology. Also, there's a lot of emphasis on education. There's emphasis on continue to do sound scientific research. There's emphasis on trying to reduce illegal kill, which is still a factor across the state, but especially in some of the more marginal areas.
I don't know how familiar you are with the wording of the last plan versus this one, but I see here there's a section that says the plan is inherently adaptable to embrace new challenges and opportunities, as well as new scientific developments or changing public preferences. In total, the plan is focused on a holistic and pragmatic approach to wolf management, conservation, and stewardship. Is that a new approach? Does the language in this plan seem different than in the past, or did it always say things like that?
Well, we did have some language about adaptive management in that 99 plan, but I think we had less of an emphasis on it. And I think something like adaptive management, most people reading the 99 plan might not remember, only because I looked at that so many times. Do I know that there was a statement in there somewhere that said adaptive management, but it didn't have the level of stress or push that I think the current plan has in it. And that's really important from a scientific standpoint, that we're learning things all the time. We're learning new things, and we need to adapt the management issues as we learn these things. And what are the best ways to control wolf depredations? There's still debate over the level of usefulness of lethal controls versus non-lethal controls. But if we come up with new methods of non-lethal controls, certainly I think we want to use those methods. So we want to make sure that we're using the best science for focusing the wolf management in the future.
Yeah, actually, speaking of new science, where it says with new science developments or changing public preferences, how do you anticipate that they're gonna deal with that if those two items are clashing, like the scientific evidence and the changing public preference don't match up? How do you anticipate they will adapt this plan?
Well, ultimately, any management plan for wolves are going to be, ultimately, it's how many wolves we can have and where we can have them. And ultimately, that's a human decision. Science can inform that decision.
I see.
But ultimately, it's going to be a human decision. And it can be a public or an open decision, or in the case of illegal kill, it becomes kind of a behind the scenes decision as well, that if you have wolves in places that people are just refusing to accept them, and we have high rates of illegal kill, as much as we want to use law enforcement to try to reduce those, ultimately, if people are going to not accept wolves in their area, it's going to control the populations. It's been observed in places like Finland that they can only get to so many wolves, and then the poaching just kind of restricts the population to a certain level, that people are just not willing to accept more wolves than what are existing currently on the landscape. So ultimately it's going to be a human decision that's based on values, but hopefully informed by science.
Yeah, it seems that way. It's basically the social tolerance aspect as opposed to the scientific tolerance, right? Is that essentially what you're getting at, Adrian?
Well, and science by itself should not be value based. Right. Science determines.
Yeah.
Science can determine how many wolves you can kill and still maintain a healthy population. But the decision whether we should be killing wolves or when we should be killing wolves, that becomes more of a human value system.
Mm-hmm.
Right. How involved were the Ojibwe and the Chippewa tribes when they were taking a look at this plan again and redoing it? Because you talked about buffer zones, and if you can touch on that a little bit about the buffer zones around the reservations and where those tribes sit.
Yeah, so the tribes are very much involved, and they especially want to maintain healthy, viable wolf populations across northern Wisconsin, where they have territorial rights outside of the reservations. But they also wanted to better protect packs living on the reservation lands. And so there was a big push by the tribes to create buffer zones or maintain buffer zones around the reservations. And it looks like the DNR is attempting to do that in this plan.
And because we talk about buffer zones in Yellowstone National Park, and that sometimes is a no-go for the legislative bodies, and sometimes the outfitters and the hunters don't like that either, because it just seems as though you're extending the limits of the park and the protections of the wolves in the park. What's different about buffer zones around the reservations that seems as though it's a little bit more accepted and able to be put into a plan like this?
Well, we hope it's accepted. I guess because this has only been announced now, and to the extent people accept this, I guess will remain to be seen. This is the direction the department is focusing currently, and hopefully most of the public does accept this. But it has similarities to what occurs in Yellowstone, that if legislators step in and decide they aren't going to allow for a lower quota in those areas, and they allow for much higher quota, it potentially can impact the wolves in those areas that you're trying to protect them. But on a broader basis, managing wolves and wolf conservation, having protected areas, refugias where they're not hunted or very lightly hunted, it benefits wolf conservation overall. And the tribes are willing to have their lands and to be part of core areas that are more highly protected. So that has broad benefits for wolf conservation, and the areas that are around the tribal lands that are being protected include mostly public forest lands, where the places that we want wolves to be, where they're providing ecological benefits. So these core areas around the buffer areas around the tribes provide a broader protection for the wolf population, just beyond just protecting the tribal reservation packs.
When they say they're putting less emphasis simply on numbers and instead focused holistically on a healthy population, what elements does the plan consider? I mean, I assume the population size, but also breeding pairs, pup success, social systems. Does that sound right? Or
I think things like that, consider? Such as what are average pack size, and we have a long history of monitoring the wolf population. And if we want a healthy, functioning wolf population, we expect that they're going to maintain normal pack sizes. If you've got pack sizes drastically reduced, they're probably not fulfilling their normal ecological function. So that would be one of the gauges that you might look at. Are pack sizes going down in this area, or are they staying about the same? And those might be criteria for determining this population should be maintained at this level, or this population can be allowed to be reduced, or this population can be allowed to be increased somewhat. Levels of conflict is probably another one, especially livestock depredations, that in areas where you've got high levels, where there's a high interspersion of farms with wildland areas, and there's a high levels of wolf depredation. some reduction of that local wolf population may help reduce some of the depredations on those farms. You don't need to drastically reduce wolves across the state or across all zones, but in a more focused area, it may be useful to reduce the wolf populations in areas where there's also very marginal wolf habitat. So it's not the core areas that the population is so dependent on, but it's areas where when there's a healthy high wolf populations, either places they just kind of flow into, and in some of these places they can become more of a nuisance situation. And when you have that occurring, it takes away from the acceptance of wolves on the landscape. So if you can control those more isolated populations that are causing problems, you create better acceptance for wolves in general across the landscape.
And even though they aren't focused on population metrics, I assume they still are going to survey the population. Does the plan lay out how they might approach that?
That's a big part of the plan, is continuing intense surveys and monitoring of the wolf population. And annually, when there will be hunting and trapping seasons, there would be annual efforts to set quotas for each of the zones. And those quotas would be set based on the health of the population, the levels of conflicts that are occurring, the size of wolf packs, other metrics that might come into play. But in general, trying to reduce conflicts but maintain healthy populations.
How important do you believe the educational aspect of this is? Because you're not, I think, in my mind, you're not just talking about the general public learning more about wolves, but I think this could be, or I hope they're using it as a tool to educate everyone around them, including the agriculturalists, anybody who's on the land that's either bordering these specific zones where there's a lot of wolf habitat. Do you believe that it's the educational aspect is going to reach everyone, or is it specifically a general public measure that they're trying to educate wolves on, or is it everyone included?
Well, I think it's going to be a mixture of various levels. So there will be educational levels, efforts for farmers, and every time a person has a depredation or suspected depredation at their land, they have a federal agent that comes out to their property and investigates and determines if it was caused by wolves, but also provides advice and recommendations. And if controlled actions are started on the farm, then there are requirements that certain mitigation practices will have to be used and a plan developed for the farm. So those are educations that are kind of ongoing all the time on a one-to-one basis in the field. So I think those kind of things are still going to be done. People talking at farm progress days, farmer events to talk about how to reduce wolf depredations on your lands, practices that you can use, contacts that you need to be making if you have problems. So those are all educational efforts that will be necessary. I think there's more efforts now on social media. Wisconsin has a pretty good system whereby anytime there is a depredation on whether it's livestock, pets, hunting dogs, there's notifications. You can have your name on this notification list and learn exactly when those are occurring. And the DNR has a very useful interactive map that you can look at and determine just where every depredation is occurring across the state, going back to 2013, and see what's going on in your neighborhood and across other parts of the landscape. So yeah, I think education has to come from a variety of fronts. Some of it will be very broad public education. Some of it will be things like this, doing podcasts, giving presentations to various groups, putting out pamphlets and information. But it's going to have to be very broad. When we did the 99 plan, we were just starting to get into social media, or actually weren't even into social media. But those are areas I think we're going to really have to be expanding into.
Yeah, so when you get into this and you're talking about, and you were talking about livestock depredations and in that vein, what are some of the non-lethal, because you said they were going to try and deter lethal deterrence of wolves, obviously killing them. What are some of the measures that they're talking about, or is it just a broad spectrum of we're going to try and limit the amount of lethal management of wolves, and we want to use more non-lethal measures? Do they lay those out, or is it just sort of a broad brush that they're painting in that scenario?
Well, actually, Wisconsin has done pretty extensive work with non-lethals because they were relisted in 2015 and weren't delisted until 2021. So those 6 years, all the depredation controls that were done were non-lethals. So especially things like flattery was probably done extensively. The government trappers, instead of trapping wolves, would be putting out flattery or putting in electric fencing, putting in more stronger fencing in areas where you got very specialized sort of livestock, maybe putting in some very tall fencing and aprons on it so that they can't crawl underneath the fence. You can't do that in every farm in the landscape, but there's certain farms in key areas where you can do this really aggressive sort of fencing. The use of guard dogs has been quite successful, especially amongst sheep owners. I've known several who've very successfully used guard dogs and eliminated most of their depredations by having guard dogs present in their landscape. So yeah, they're using various sort of noise-making devices, and now those have become somewhat sophisticated that you can set them to occur at irregular time intervals, or there are even those that you can set to respond to a specific frequency of a radio collar. Of course, then you have to get the wolf radio collar in order to do that.
Right.
So there's a variety of techniques that are being used, and they're being used pretty extensively across Wisconsin right now. So yeah, as being back on endangered species list, those are the things that are being done right now. Minor adjustments in just how your livestock management, where you graze your cattle, when you let the calves out in the springtime after the calves are born, keeping them closer to the barns when they're going through calving. And some of it is just spending more time just watching your herd.
Yeah. Let's dive into some of the things that weren't as positive. I guess I'll just say the negatives, or the things that you took away from this that didn't seem to really appease you guys.
Yeah. I'm going to go back to my list if that's okay.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. Yep. So just for all of you that are listening, so Adrian has these awesome PowerPoints that he was sharing with Stephen and I prior to this. So he can explain it a lot better, and there's actually visuals here, but he's got the areas. Yeah. So it's areas of concern. So yeah, go ahead, Adrian, and tell us what you guys were talking about there.
Yeah. So one of the areas of concern is that there's emphasis in hunting seasons to reduce the number of permits per quota. That one of the things we saw in that 2021 hunt is the number of permits were probably way too high. The department offered 20 permits for every wolf to be killed. That actually came down to about 13, 14 permits because everybody granted a permit didn't necessarily buy one, but still ended up being a lot of permits and a lot of wolves being killed fairly quickly. So the department is talking about reducing number of permits to reduce the overkill such as that. A concern that could occur, though, is kind of the opposite side. If you have too few permits and hunters are not as efficiently hunting wolves, that means the season is extended over a much longer period of time. And that creates other problems. So if you extend a hunting season into January and February, when much of the track surveys are being done and we're getting population information, having hunting and trapping seasons out there are going to disrupt the opportunity to be able to do good track surveys. So having too long of a hunting season is an issue of concern, and depending on how permits are managed, that could become an issue. Another concern is that the use of hunting dogs was one of the ways that the department was that hunters were so efficient in killing wolves in that February 2021 hunt, and dogs were used throughout the state. Under the state hunting regulations, wolf hunting regulations, hunters are allowed to use dogs after the firearm deer season in Wisconsin, which is at the end of November, early December, the first Monday after Thanksgiving, actually. But the hunting season starts the first Saturday of November. And if that hunting season is completed for that zone before that Monday after Thanksgiving, then there's no use of dogs in those areas. So we don't see the kind of over-harvest, efficient harvest that we saw from the use of dogs. So having shorter seasons that are completed before the end of November is much more beneficial in reducing impacts on surveys that need to be done and reducing the use of dogs on the landscape. So those are a couple of things. One of the counties in Wisconsin that in western Lincoln County. It was one of the first places we found wolves shortly after they entered the state in the late 1970s. Initially, wolves appeared right along the Minnesota border, but Lincoln County is kind of north central Wisconsin, and they appeared there shortly thereafter. There's even some remote possibility that it might have been a relic population that never went extinct in the state. And the current plan does not recognize that as a core area and lists it as a more marginal area where there would be higher levels of control. So we hope to see that area return back to a more core area where it's more highly protected. One of the things that our organization, the Timberwolf Alliance and the Wisconsin Green Fire had requested in the wolf plan is to have separate stakeholder committees and separate science committees, as had been done earlier, to make sure there was broad representation and to keep the science separate from the social issues and some of the attitude issues. But the current plan will be one advisory committee that will consist of both. And that means probably some groups are not going to be as well represented in the new planning process as has been done in the past. So those are a couple of areas, some of our areas of concern.
So when you're talking about these zones, because we were talking about this prior again, it seems like you were saying in the way the state is situated and the way the zones are situated, 1 and 2 are very ideal wolf habitat. So why would they add that from a core wolf area into one that needs to be managed more? What was the reasoning? But is there a specific reasoning for that, or was that just they threw it in there as
I think somebody was just looking at highways that made sense as far as making easy boundaries around zones, and okay. Often when zones are created, management areas, often highways are used because you want something that the hunter and trapper can easily recognize on the landscape, and the more major a highway, the easier it is to recognize. So I think it might have been just an oversight that they were just looking at a highway system and went with interstate highways and U.S. highways instead of some of the town roads and county roads that makes it a little bit more harder to identify a boundary. So I think it might have been more of an oversight.
Mm. And then when you're talking about the lower permits and obviously reducing the effectiveness of track surveys, both with the wolf hunting dogs and then the lower permits per wolf quotas, it almost seems as though that's a contradiction to them wanting to have again, whether it's consciously or subconsciously, when you're talking about educating the public more about the population, about the species itself, it does, in theory, take away all of that science that people are trying to collect. Because if it's reducing the effectiveness of track surveys and looking at the population, you're not going to be able to get the correct information out to people there. Am I looking at that accurately, or do you feel that way?
Right. Yeah. So the department has to deal with this with the background of having hunting regulations in place that were created by the legislature, and the department can't change the regulations that the legislature created, and that includes the possibility that a wolf hunting season can last until the end of February if quotas are not achieved. So if you have too few permits, that makes it harder for hunters to complete the quota. That means the hunting season is extended over a much longer period of time. And then there's a greater risk if there's a long hunting season that if they're occurring during the snow tracking periods of December, January, February, it's going to be disrupting some of the survey activity.
Is there any concern about having a repeat of what happened in 21? And this is trying, in other words, any of the areas that you're concerned with here, that the group and you guys are concerned with here, that there could be a repeat of what happened in 2021?
Yeah, that's also my question too, because while you guys are talking, I'm reading this PDF, and the language that's being used does not strike me as coming from a state that would even where 2021 had even occurred. Like it sounds very thorough, very balanced, and yet 2021 happened.
Yeah, I think 2021 because and for the listeners who don't have all that background, the DNR was forced to hold a wolf hunting season, and again, in part because the DNR has the requirements that if wolves are not on the federal or state endangered and threatened species list, they have to hold a wolf hunting season annually. And that can occur anywhere from the first Saturday of November until the end of February. And because delisting in 2021 occurred in early January, there were groups that were arguing there's still time to hold a wolf hunting season because you can hold one until the end of February. And the department had recommended we should wait until the fall so we can get all of our information together and plan this hunt more carefully. But because of a group sued saying, well, we have a right to hunt wolves and there's opportunity to have a wolf hunting season, and the law creates this opportunity to cross this time period. And that lawsuit won, and the department was forced to hold a wolf hunting season. Hopefully that sort of situation won't occur again. And if hunting seasons are started in the fall and it's a hunting trapping season, what we saw in 2013 and 2014, most of the wolves were hunted and trapped before the end of November, and only a few zones were opened up to hunting with dogs, and those were only for very short periods of time. So we didn't see that kind of effect that we saw in 2021. So hopefully that was just an unusual situation that is not likely to occur again.
Wow, that makes a lot of sense. Can you talk about the section in this PDF where it's talking about, I think, essentially human dimensions, cultural significance? Like, who did they discover has a positive attitude or a negative attitude towards wolves? Who wants wolves? Who doesn't want wolves? It's an interesting part of this document.
Yep. So one of the things that the DNR did hold last summer 2022, hold a public attitude survey, and I don't have the numbers in front of me, but thousands of people were interviewed, and looking at people both in wolf range and outside of wolf range. And in general, what they found was there's pretty strong support for wolf conservation across the state, even people living in wolf range, and asking questions such as, how many wolves should we have in a landscape, whether it should be similar to what we currently have, more than what we have, less than what we have. Even people living in wolf range, most said as many as we have or more. So it showed in general that was fairly strong support. Amongst hunters, there's probably a little bit less support, especially amongst bear hunters who have concerns because occasionally their hunting dogs get killed by wolves. So they as a group tend not to be as supportive for a wolf population and tend to request or encourage a smaller or lower wolf population. Farmers often want more of a lower population as well, concerned about livestock. So yeah, depending on the groups and whether they hunt or whether they're farmers, those could be big factors on the kind of wolf population that they're willing to accept. But even amongst farmers and amongst hunters, most do accept having some level of wolf population on the landscape.
Is that something that you all were surprised to see, or was this seems like the normal for what's going on in Wisconsin at the current moment?
I think we weren't too surprised because this survey, a similar survey was done in 2014, 8 years ago, and it showed similar results. And actually, the current survey shows even stronger support for wolf conservation and stronger support for maintaining wolf populations at current population levels in the areas they're occurring, and less of a concern about some of the conflicts with wolves. So in general, it seemed like attitudes had actually somewhat increased over that time period.
It's interesting because when Stephen and I, since I've gotten back from the symposium, Stephen and I have interviewed a lot more people from not only the symposium, but just in these, Colorado and Montana, and now back to you in Wisconsin. And it really just seems the general tone of the public more so. And we're not talking about special interest groups or things like that, but the public, like you say, even in these rural wolf areas, they are for some form of wolf conservation, having them on the landscape. It just seems it's the dynamic. I think it really shows the dynamic of the shift that's happened since they've been reintroduced, and also maybe the protections and seeing these hunts and things like that. Do you see that as a cultural shift more so, and that people are starting to understand them more and that education is happening, or is it just natural?
I think it's a combination of some of those things. I think people living in wolf range that really have less concerns about. I think one of the things we're seeing declining are the attacks on pet dogs. That pet dogs, I think we did see some cases in the past where somebody letting their dog out early in the morning and running down in areas where there's wolves nearby, and the dog runs down to the end of the yard and encounters a wolf and gets into attack. People I think, are more careful. They know there's wolves in the neighborhood. They're probably more careful. They either go outside with the dog, put on some lights, and make some noise. And so I think people are learning the minor little tricks you need to do so you can still live with wolves. So we're seeing a lot less of those kind of pet dog attacks. And so it seems that people are sort of learning to live with wolves. But I think the educational efforts are also helping. That's not to say everybody accepts wolves, and there continue to be enough people that do oppose wolves, and we do continue to see people who want zero wolves, and we do continue to see illegal killing wolves. So certainly there will always be some people who oppose or not accept wolves on the landscape, but in general, the vast majority of people do seem to accept having a wolf population.
What about the idea that they're decimating deer populations? Is that still a widely accepted perspective amongst hunters, or is the current science addressing that, or where's Wisconsin at with that?
I think there is that concern that they're having impacts on the deer population, and we just finished our firearm deer season for northern Wisconsin and the rest of Wisconsin, and in areas where I am in northern Wisconsin, we've had an increase in the buck harvest, increase in overall deer harvest. In central Wisconsin, we also have wolves. The buck harvest was increased, I think, about 30%. In our area, about 14% from last year. So in areas with healthy wolf populations, we're seeing increases in the deer hunting opportunities. So there's certainly no evidence that the population is being decimated by wolves. That's not to say there aren't some areas in the middle wolf pack areas where there's less occurrence of wolves, or they're or less occurrence of deer, I should say, that it's more difficult to find deer because the wolf presence makes deer a little bit more skittish, stay closer to dense cover, so they're not as easily seen, perhaps. But certainly, there is a healthy population of deer on the landscape. It's interesting. I just talked to a guy the other day and mentioned something about, didn't see hardly any deer, just saw wolves and coyotes. And I said, have you got any trail cameras out on your property? Oh, yeah. What do you see on those? Well, there's some nice big bucks, but they only come around at night. So
they're smart.
That's been also a very useful tool, I think, on the landscape, is people getting trail cameras. And in the past, when hunters weren't seeing any deer, they would say, well, it's because of wolves. Now, more often, they'll say, well, the deer are coming, but they're not coming at night. And one of the issues that we do have in parts of Wisconsin is we still allow the baiting of deer, and there's evidence that baiting of deer can cause them to become more nocturnal. So they're coming out at night, filling up their bellies, and then mostly just staying bedded down throughout the daytime. That can create the image that there's a few deer in the landscape. But of course, if they've got their trail cameras up, they're still seeing those big bucks at night.
Any recorded, or at least any recent recorded instances of aggression towards humans?
We have not had any verified attacks or injuries to human beings in Wisconsin. There was a case a few years ago where a man in central Wisconsin claimed to have encountered some aggressive wolves that he shot at, and some investigations were done, but no animals were found to indicate that they had been aggressively attacking him. And then I think in the same area there was a couple of hunters who saw some bold acting wolves, but no physical attacks on people.
That's a good sign.
Yeah.
Is CWD a factor in any of the provisions that's being made, possibly towards making these populations either stay the same or possibly grow a little? Because I know CWD is a big issue. Is the science and the information looking at that and influencing the DNR's response to wolf populations, or is that not really something that they're looking at?
Well, I think in general, disease spread is an issue of concern, and that's we expect when the department talks in terms of ecological benefits. I think that falls into that broad spectrum of ecological benefits. Is that wolves potentially could be suppressing the chronic wasting disease. And what we see in most of the areas where we have our healthy wolf populations are not the place where we have chronic wasting disease in Wisconsin, which is very extensive in southern parts of Wisconsin where we don't have wolf packs. So part of it is a habitat base. It's more in the farmland areas where we have chronic wasting disease, and we have higher deer densities in those areas as well. But right now, there seems to be pretty good evidence that it's not spreading into areas where we've got a healthy wolf population. So certainly that's one of the ecological benefits of wolves that we'd be considering as far as a factor for considering wolf conservation.
How are wolves categorized in Wisconsin in the context of hunting? Like, if you're going to apply for a tag, what are you applying for?
You apply for a wolf hunting and trapping permit, there's you're applying for a kill permit, and so when you get that tag that authorizes you to kill a wolf using either trapping or hunting, and while the law requires that trapping is part of the season, the department does have recommendations on which traps to use, and those that have gone through best management practices evaluation, so that reduce any kind of inhumane trapping of wolves. So there is you apply for a permit. It costs to apply. So and those monies then also go to wolf conservation and paying for any damage caused by wolves. So there are two payments you'd have to make. One is applying for a wolf hunting permit, hunting and trapping permit, and then you pay additional for that permit once if you're granted that permit.
But they're considered a predator? I mean, that's
they're considered a game species.
A game species.
Oh, they are, okay.
A game species that it has a hunting and trapping season.
Okay.
Wow. Yeah, because we were talking with we were talking with Wyoming about Wyoming, and it's to say they're listed as a predator, but in the same category as jackrabbits and raccoons and all that other stuff. So
yeah, that's why I was curious.
Yeah, that's an interesting way for them.
So in Wisconsin, you also have trapping and hunting of bobcats, and they're considered a fur bearer, but they're a fur bearer for which you have to get a permit. And you apply for a permit, and only so many people are issued a permit depending on status of the population and where you're applying to hunt them. And I think in bobcats, it's a separate permit for trapping and a hunting season. But in case of wolves, it can be used for either hunting or trapping.
Got it. Let's move to the things that didn't change that you want to talk about. What were some of the things that now is this? When you're talking about things that weren't changed, are we talking about from 2009 to now, like from the plan that was currently in place to what they're proposing now, or this was stuff that, just to clarify what the meaning of things that weren't changed, in other words?
So things that the DNR cannot change in this plan are those things that are written into law through legislative action. So this is based on the 2012 wolf hunting and trapping season that was created by the legislature. And so as legislation, it's a statute, it's part of the law, and the Department of Natural Resources can't change the law. The department can determine the rules for how you implement that law, but it can't change the law. So that includes the decision to choose to hunt any parts of Wisconsin. The law that's currently written says there shall be a wolf hunting and trapping season across Wisconsin. And the department can't say, well, we will not, or will have a hunting season here and not have a hunting season there. The law doesn't allow that. And the law also requires the use of dogs for hunting wolves. But as I said, that doesn't occur until after the firearm deer season at the end of November. So if the hunting and trapping season is completed by that time, that doesn't go into effect. The law also requires when the hunting season can start, which is the first Saturday of November, and that it can potentially extend until the end of February. But if the quota that the department sets is achieved before then, the department can close the season earlier. So, and that's what happened every year in 2012, 13, and 14. It didn't happen in 2021. We are already it closed in only 3 days because it was done so quickly.
I see on the list, eliminate compensation for dogs. They used to compensate for what? Dogs dying in the field when hunting wolves?
No, well, that's the one exception that exists. Dogs are hunting dogs that are being killed by wolves when they're used for hunting bears, coyotes, bobcats, birds, snowshoe hares. Those are reimbursed by the department. Dogs that are killed by wolves in the hunting of wolves, those are not reimbursed. So that is the one situation where people cannot get reimbursed for their dogs being killed by wolves. Livestock, in all situations where livestock are being killed by wolves, people are being reimbursed. So those are part of the law, that there will be compensation programs for dogs and livestock. And the last of those is that the DNR cannot close a zone to a harvest until after 24-hour notification. So if a harvest occurs very quickly, as occurred in 2021, the department wasn't able to close the zones quickly enough to avoid overharvest. But in the harvests that were held in 2012, 13, and 14, they were much more gradual. They occurred over several weeks, and it was easier for the department to anticipate, okay, we're getting to a point now where within 2 or 3 wolves of where the quota needs to be, so we put out a notification that the season is going to be closed tomorrow at 3:00. So, but yeah, it does require that 24-hour notification. So the department can't just say we close it today.
What are your feelings? And I know this is sort of a personal, emotional thing, that not necessarily a legislative or a DNR issue here. What's your thought about the word harvest when we talk about these wolf hunts? I know that was kind of brought up in the symposium when we were there, and people were saying, you harvest vegetables. You harvest vegetables or a crop, and we're talking about a predator that we're harvesting that doesn't. It is a trophy game species. It's not something. I don't hear of anybody eating wolf. Maybe once in a while. What's your feeling on that? Just because you've been in the field for so long, and it seems as though it's just a regular term. Where does that sit for you, that you've been doing this work for so long?
Yeah, I know that it's offensive to some people to hear the term harvest. I think from the standpoint of population management, population dynamics, it is a common term that's been used over time. And I think even like in human beings, when people die and their organs are removed, that's referred to as a harvest of organs. So, in this case, it has a very specific meaning. It becomes a bit of jargon, maybe in a sense, but a harvest means a regulated public hunting and or trapping season. So having to say a regulated hunting or trapping season every time instead of just saying harvest, it's just that much easier. Yes, you're killing wolves, but that's different from illegal killing of wolves, or it's different from wolves being killed in a depredation management situation, although under some circumstances those could be referred to as harvest as well. So it has a usefulness. It's within the science of population dynamics as a term, but I understand at the same time that in certain situations, to certain groups, maybe that can be an offensive group. I know it can be offensive to some of the Native American folks. So I think a person, depending on who you're talking to, sometimes you have to use different language.
Yeah, I actually think it is part of, if I'm Googling it here, it's popping up. Yeah, I mean, the one of the sub-definitions of harvest is to catch or kill animals for human consumption or use. Yeah. So, I mean, it's...
Yeah.
I think this.
I get it.
You get it, right? Because I think it's just the fact that you're not using any parts of the. I mean, again, if we're talking back in, if somebody's.
I see what you mean. Yeah.
You know what I'm saying? If you're using it for sustenance for eating, if you're using it for warmth back, I mean, we're talking that tens of thousands of years ago. I think that's one thing. I think
it does say human consumption or use is kind of general, but human consumption is the primary. So I get it.
Yeah. And
wolves are used for their furs, and there are peoples in the northlands of Alaska and Canada who their livelihood are trapping of animals and selling their furs, and it includes many native peoples. Right. So for many of them, wolves are a harvested animal that they along with the martens and the mink and the beaver and other animals that they trap and hunt and sell the furs, and that's part of their livelihood.
So so overall, Adrian, what's the hope here? Are we looking for, or what's the outcome? First of all, how much, I know it's in the draft period right now. When's the comment period's open now until when? And then when is the final piece coming? Is it early next year? What's the timeline for this management plan to sort of come to fruition?
Yeah, the end of the comment period is January 10th. So anybody who's interested, wants to comment, go on to Wisconsin Department of Natural Resources website and the wolf plan. You can look at the whole plan, and there's a place on the website where you can then make your comments. After those comments are received, I guess it's going to sort of depend on the volume of comments and how much the department has to work with before they then deal with those comments to come up with a finalized plan. And I think the plans were to try to have it to the Natural Resource Board sometime this next summer of 2023. And when it's presented to the department, to the Natural Resource Board, that is a sort of a public hearing that anybody can appear in front of the board and express your opinions on how you think wolves ought to be managed in the state. So that's a public hearing process that would be in place.
So for you, do you feel that this is on the right track? Or obviously it seems as though there's still things that aren't to your liking and your group's liking. Do you believe that let's be I mean, honestly, there's probably not going to be everything that you want in there, but do you feel that there is a track where this is going, that it's clearly going to be better than it was prior to this? How do you feel personally about that?
Yeah, I think there's more positive here than negative. That's for sure. The areas I talked about, some of the concerns, I think those can be addressed and perhaps in the finalized version of the plan. I know there's going to be a lot of political pressure, and there's going to be pressure from certain groups to try to go to a numeric goal. And many have a preference for going to a numeric goal of 350. That was a part of the 1999 plan. Hopefully the department is going to be able to withstand the attempts to try to do that and stick to the non-numeric goal that you're trying to propose in this. I'm hoping that there isn't too much political pressure or legislative meddling with this plan to push it back down to those kind of levels. But in general, the way the plan is reading right now, I think it has a lot more positives than it has negatives to it.
I mean, could that happen? I mean, wolves are pretty successful breeding species. Isn't there like 970 some odd wolves still in Wisconsin? I mean, how could Wisconsin get it down to 3 something?
Well, that would require extremely heavy harvest hunting and trapping of the Wisconsin wolf population. That would require actual removing wolves from 2/3 or 3/4 of their range in Wisconsin right now. So I think most people would find that unacceptable, but I know there are members of the public who would like to see that. So hopefully those groups that have those more extreme ideas are not going to prevail in this effort.
That's crazy, because that's the stuff, Stephen, we were just talking the other day about what's happening in Wyoming, and even what's going on with Montana, is that you're proposing a quarter, basically, of the quarter to almost a third of the population. In this case, you're talking about 2/3 of the population being eradicated, which I don't know. I guess to some that's what people want to see. It seems as though you're setting yourself up for another black eye situation statewide, as opposed to managing it correctly. And it seems as though the population, like you said, Stephen and Adrian too, that it's going the way it should be going, and people for the most part are dealing with it in multiple ways, and it seems to be successful.
I think also one of the risks are, if we have an unacceptable wolf plan, it's going to further incentivize those people who want to keep wolves on the endangered species list, and that means lawsuits to keep them as a federally managed species will continue. I think if we have a reasonable conservation plan, there's a better chance that the state can get wolves delisted by the federal government and keep them delisted. I think if people see that wolves are being managed and there's a sound conservation plan for their management for the state, I think there's a better chance that they can remain off the endangered species list. And then the state is going to have the more flexible management to deal with the conflict. So in the long run, it's going to be much better for wolves and for conflict management if they can stay off the endangered species list and we don't have this back and forth. So even people who would like to see a lot fewer wolves, having that kind of aggressive kind of harvest control of the wolf populations is just going to incentivize the people who want to sue and keep them on the endangered species list.
Right. That's what we were saying. I mean, that's what we've been saying for a long time is I don't understand the risk that some of these states are willing to take. It just seems like to put a black cloud over this whole subject in Wisconsin or Montana or whatever for essentially unachievable management goals that are just going to spark up tons of lawsuits. I just never, it's not, a lot of it's not achievable first off. And then it just doesn't seem worth it to me to bring all that negative attention to these ideas when they're already struggling to, what's the likelihood of that this plan will change drastically by the time the public commenting is over?
I don't know. I mean, I think in general, I don't expect it to change too drastically. I'm hoping the politics are going to have minimum impact on it. I know there'll be political pressures to try to change it, but my hope is that it's not going to change drastically from what the department is proposing here.
Yeah, it seems, I tend to agree with what you're saying, and I would probably, if I was in depth of it as much as you are, Adrian, I would probably come up with the same positives, negatives, things that can't be changed. So we tend to not worry about that stuff. So I agree with you. I think as long as people can see the middle of this whole thing, and meaning the middle from the extremes, I think that would bode well for everyone, like you say, and all species involved, that this can be managed and keep these populations as they are, and just keep the education and everything going. I still believe that's the greatest power that anybody has in this situation, is really just to inform as much as possible about ways to deter, ways to live with, and ultimately thrive with this species. That's the whole point of this entire thing.
The whole thing seems pretty, like I said, I'm reading it. It seems pretty, they covered
everything. Yeah.
They covered it. So as long as it doesn't change drastically, and hopefully what's being said here is, carried out, but it's a pretty good write-up. But then again, I didn't read the last one.
Yeah.
To compare, but it's a pretty good.
No, I think it's good. Go ahead, Adrian.
I think it's a real thorough document. It's a good effort at trying to use good, sound conservation for managing the state wolf population. And I'm hoping that it prevails and the plan doesn't change drastically from what the department is presenting.
Yeah,
and for people who want to comment, supporting the department is really going to be useful here to achieve the plan that they're trying to submit here. If people comment too much on the things that the department can't do anything about, that they don't like the hunting season, they don't like the use of dogs, they want to stop those kind of things, they don't want dogs to be paid for, that's not going to do a lot of good. What the department really needs here is support for the kind of things they're trying to do, is eliminate the numeric system of setting a goal, protecting wolves around Indian reservation lands, focusing on the ecological benefits of wolves.
Yeah, right. I think that's the stuff.
So forget the things we can't change for now and just...
Yep.
Yeah, I agree. Absolutely. Yep. So we're going to have all that stuff in the description so you guys can go and look at the plan, comment on the plan. Adrian, what's the best way, is other than the documents that you sent us, what are the ways that people can research it or go and see the plan and get involved?
Well, I guess going on a DNR website, pulling off the plan off the DNR website and reading that plan, and then going on that same website to submit their comments.
Okay, so we'll have all that stuff available for anybody who's listening, so you guys can check this out. It seems like the public comment period is up until January 10th. So we'll be there. Adrian Wydeven, thank you, man. This was very informative. Thank you for breaking it down and letting people understand what's going on. We appreciate you and can't thank you enough for all you're doing.
Yeah, I appreciate it.
Well, thank you. Thank you for having me on.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Al Steele out there, and Stephen, I'll be with you next time. Bye, everybody.
Bye-bye.
Looking to support Wolf Connection or sponsor one of the wolves in our pack? Just go to wolfconnection.org, click on the Donate tab, and find out more information.